Y'all can relax, because I'm a Southern storyteller, okay? I'm going to tell you a story. And we could each do this to share our faith and how God's grace unfurls in us, how we get called. We have a maxim in our community, I'm a sister of St. Joseph, never leap ahead of grace. Well, I got to confess, I've been a leaper many times, with grace, without grace. But this is about riding a wave of grace, listening, and then going where grace has led me, which is to you tonight. Because when I did come out of the execution chamber with the first man, that's a story, there are two stories in Dead Man Walking, Patrick Saunier, when he was killed in the electric chair, and I was there with him. And he looked at my face. Mine was the last face he looked at. And I had said to him, look at me when they do this, and I'll be the face of Christ for you. I came out, it was the middle of the night, and I remembered how in the Gospel of John, when Jesus went out on the night of his passion, and John simply says, and it was night. So in the middle of the night, Louisiana killed Patrick Saunier for a crime he had done, and I was there. And I had never watched anybody be killed in front of my eyes. I knew it was all legal. I knew the Supreme Court had said it was okay. And in fact, in 1984, when Patrick was executed in Louisiana, 87%, the polls showed, of people in Louisiana approved of his death that night. People were saying, yeah, we got to have the death penalty. But my own eyes had seen it. And I threw up. When the prison vehicle brought me outside the gates, his sisters were there waiting for me. They put a coat around me. And then I remember thinking, right there in the dark, I didn't know there'd be a book. I didn't know there'd be a movie. I didn't know there was going to be anything except this. I remember thinking really clearly, the people are never going to get close to this. And you never are. You are never going to be a witness to when California kills somebody for their crime. You're never going to get close to it. They've even tried to bring it to court that the public should be allowed to see what we do when we say we need to execute people. And that I had been brought close, and so I had to be the one to tell the story because I was a witness. Now, how did this happen to me? I didn't set out. Believe me, you don't become a nun saying, one day I'm going to go to death row. Like, you know, the upward mobility of Jesus, you know. No, indeed. No, indeed. And so that's the whole first part of the story. It was about waking up to the deeper dimensions of the gospel of Jesus, you know, to the full stature of Christ. We grow into Christ. We become Christ. We grow. We start off with a simple faith, a child's faith. We know that Jesus is the center of our life. We know we can turn to God. We know that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. We learn all of this, and then we begin to live it. And for me, a big moment of awakening, and it's the first part of the story that brought me into the inner city among poor people in New Orleans, was the awakening that Jesus was on the side of poor people and a preferential love for poor people. I grew up in privilege. We don't know we're privileged when we grow up in privilege. I keep thinking of goldfish swimming around a bowl. We all swim around our own little goldfish, our own little tidal pool where we grow up. My daddy was a lawyer. I had an excellent education. I learned to do public speaking when I was a junior at St. Joseph Academy. So I'm not scared to talk to people. It's like we all sitting around the kitchen table right now. I'm just talking to you. I don't have to read off this lecture notes. It's just like I want to talk to you. I want to bring you there. And so it was stirring in the community, though, that none of us were directly involved with poor people. And that social justice meant being on the side of the people who don't have a voice, the people who don't have access and agency. And I'm going, look, Jesus said the poor you'll always have with you. You're never going to be able to end this thing, poverty. And you just look at the countries in the world. I mean, you know, we got to go on diets because we overweight. And the little kids are starving in the Sudan and India and all. But isn't that the way the world's always been? Isn't that just the way the world is? What's the gospel of Jesus got to do with it? Didn't Jesus say, not by bread alone? You can't end poverty. That's just a social thing. You want to give people spiritual bread. Give them God, and they have everything. Of course, I didn't know any real people who were poor. I lived out in the suburbs, see? And I know bad things are happening in the inner city of New Orleans, just like in every inner city, in Chicago, in wherever. But I was separated from it. And you just kind of begin to think, well, those people could get jobs if they wanted, and they could go to school. And we begin to have this feeling of almost like, why don't they get up and help themselves? Black people in New Orleans, slavery's long over. Can't be whining all the time. We need this and we need that. Get out there and work for it. There was a little girl one time who wrote an essay. I could have written it myself about the poor family. Once there was a poor family. The mama was poor, the daddy was poor, the children were poor, the butler was poor, the chauffeur was poor. The whole family, was poor. And I'm working out in the Lakeview area in New Orleans and had never been in the inner city. And I woke up. And I got to call it grace because I was resisting this thing of social justice that Jesus had told us about loving each other. And the gospel of Jesus is all about charity. It's all about love. But justice, where did that fit in? So there had been great resistance in me. And resistance in us is always a sign, learning to discern when the Spirit's moving us to something. God was calling me to get out of that groove. And there was resistance at first, and then I got it. Because to wake up, when we wake up, enlightenment in whatever form it comes, any spiritual tradition, it's always grace. Because we could announce we're going in a cave for 40 days, 40 nights. We're only going to eat bread and drink water. We're going to fast. We're going to pray. We can announce that we're going to end the fast in 40 days and come out. One thing we cannot announce when we go in. And I will come out enlightened. When grace wakes us up. And the Gospel of John is filled with the Spirit. When the Spirit is given to you, He will teach you all things. He will remind you of what I've said to you. There's always this interiority within us in the spiritual life of growing into God and into the stature of Christ. So I heard a talk about social justice by this nun, Sister Maria Gustanillo, and the way she talked about Jesus and the poor. I got it. I sat with all the other sisters. I'd heard talks before. They never got through to me. I heard this talk, and I realized I don't even know any real poor people. I'd grown up, my daddy was a successful lawyer, and the only way I knew African-American people growing up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana during the days of segregation was as our servants. Ellen worked in the house with Mama, and Jesse worked in the yard, and I didn't even know their last names. In Sacred Heart Church, black kids made their communion separate from us. This is Deep South. This is Jim Crow laws. And what did the gospel and the body of Christ have to do with the black people who couldn't come to any public places with us? I never made the connection between the two things. But I woke up. And I moved into the St. Thomas housing projects. And here was a discovery. Here's why, when we wake up, there's a humility that comes with it, because it took me a while to wake up. And I get there, boy, there were people already awake. There were already 4 other nuns working at Hope House. Sister Lori Schaff had awakened long before me and started this place. And I'll wake up, and so you're always standing on the shoulders of other people when you start working for justice. People are always awake ahead of us. And so Sister Lori, I remember she told me when I came in, she said, now, Helen, you don't have to have a blueprint about how you're going to eradicate poverty in your back pocket. Just be neighbor and listen to the people and start learning from them. So now I'm looking at the other America. All the rules were different. It was like I'd gone to another country in a way. Later, when I did research for Dead Man Walking, I found out there were more complaints to the Justice Department about police brutality in New Orleans than any other city in the United States. Did I know about police brutality? To whom? I'm not afraid of any police being brutal to me. My car stops on a highway and a state trooper pulls up behind me at 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever. I'm not scared. I'm saying, hey, they're going to help me. And what a different story coming from the black community, and especially among the young men. Not all policemen, of course, but policemen are human beings in a culture just like all of us are. And I began to see, and especially people coming into the Adult Learning Center, that was really a big shock for me, because I knew the public schools were struggling, but we had a really strong Catholic school system in New Orleans. So the mayor and all the leaders of the community are sending their kids, of course, to the Catholic schools. And here are the public schools, and so here we have the Adult Learning Center where people coming in who had dropped out, coming to get their GED, or older people like Miss Ruby, who was in her 70s. She just wants to come to learn to read the Bible before she dies. She never had a chance to read. And Louisiana is one of those really poor states with high misery statistics, and we have some of the highest adult illiteracy rates in the United States. We vie with Mississippi. Our people are poor. And we're not having gangbusters to try to take public schools and raise them up, which is where the poor people are. And you see this thing of privatizing. What happens to poor people with this so-called voucher thing? It's complex, I know. But then, so people, here they are, here comes this kid. Well, how far did you get in high school? Well, I was a junior. Well, look, you had one more year to go in high school. Let's see what your reading level is, see what your math level is. And we're going to work with you individually for you to get your GED. The kid couldn't read a third grade reader, and he was a junior in high school. And I thought, even if this kid graduates from high school and he's got the diploma hanging on his wall, he can't read. What's going to happen to a young black kid in the United States of America who can't read? Why did I get such a good education? And it just came, it's not that I was so blooming virtuous, it's just I was so blooming protected and cushioned and given so much. And then the deep, deep desire then to serve. Black people had served me all my life growing up. I didn't even think about it. Now it's my time to serve. And I began to wake up. I began to read Martin Luther King. I read Dorothy Day. I read Gandhi. I read about how do you resist injustice and how do you work for social change in a way that doesn't use violence, that uses persuasion. The gospel of Jesus is always about persuasion, never coercion, never judgments and harsh criticisms or condemnations of people. That's not Jesus. And we have that aplenty, but we don't need to do that. And just begin to live out what I see. And so I'm reading Lives of the Saints now that I'm ready for, that I'd never read before. And every day I'm listening to the people and I'm learning and I'm seeing the suffering of what happens, how poverty grinds you down. And you know, you have all these things, oh, well, poor people are happy. Look, they're always laughing, they're always smiling. Everybody I knew was on nerve pills. Or mama saying to a kid, boy, you on my last nerve. And people are nervous, and people are agitated, and people don't know how they're going to do the rent, and people don't know where health care is, and it means going to sit in charity hospital with a sick child for 6 to 8 hours till some intern's going to learn medicine on your child. Poor people always waiting. And my dad on the phone to call the plumber, call somebody to come do something in the yard, calling resources, connections in Baton Rouge. And here's Miss Eva, who's had a leak in her bathroom in public housing. For over 9 months, the floor's always wet, and she can't get anybody to come and fix that leak because she's in public housing. And I just kept praying, thank you, God, for waking me up. I just want to be of service. What am I called to do? And it's while I was there, one day, coming out of the Adult Learning Center, here comes a friend of mine from a prison coalition office. I didn't know anything about prisons. How am I going to know about prisons? We're the highest incarcerated in the United States in Louisiana. The United States is the highest incarcerated in the world. 2.3 million people. In California, in 28 years, California built 27 prisons and 1 university. What's going on here? Who's benefiting from this? What's happening? I don't know anything. Because on my little goldfish bowl and my little tidal pool, I didn't know anybody in prison. And I knew what the gospel said. You know, Matthew 25, I was hungry, he gave me to eat. I was thirsty, he gave me to drink. I was in prison, he came to me. But whenever I'd read that part, I was in prison, you came to me. Well, you know, like we all our own little spin doctors with those scriptures, if you know what I mean. We're like, I was in prison. Well, I mean, you know, you could be shy, like you in prison, because you don't know how to talk to people in a crowd, like you imprisoned in your own shyness. I was in prison, you came to see me. I don't really know in my life what that means. So what happened? I just want to talk here, too, about the sneakiness of God. This is Sneaky God Part 1 with me. I'm walking out of the Adult Learning Center on St. Andrew Street. Here comes a friend from the Prison Coalition office. He has a little clipboard, had a little project going on. If he saw you that day, he's going to invite you to be part of it, too. Bumps into me. Hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal to somebody on death row here in Louisiana? I said, yeah, sure. I was an English major. I could be a good pen pal. You know, I could send him maybe a poem, you know what I mean? I didn't dream they were going to kill this person because we hadn't had an execution in Louisiana. It's the early 80s. We hadn't had an execution in 20 years. There had been an unofficial moratorium on the death penalty for 20 years in the United States, including the deep South states, who are the real practitioners of the death penalty, including today. 80% of all the executions go on in the 10 southern states that practice slavery. Now, you got 720 people sitting on your death row in California, but you execute people on average every 20 years. You're not really serious about killing people here. You got too many good lawyers or people, good judges, too. But Louisiana, so I'm not even aware of a death. And you know what? You learn so much because once you wake up, see, when I did the research for Dead Man Walking, when I was going to school at St. Joseph Academy, right down the street from Broussard Street was in the city of Baton Rouge, where the city jail was. We used to have a portable electric chair in Louisiana that they'd bring around to the different towns and cities to make an example of don't you try to kill anybody in Baton Rouge or don't try to rape anybody. There were a number of people who were electrocuted to death for the crime of rape. And of course, it was always for the rape of white women by black men. Never, the black women being raped wasn't even considered a crime. Did I know what was going on down the street with the portable electric chair? Of course not. So anyway, hey, Sister Ellen, you want to be a pen pal? Yeah, and he writes a guy's name down for me, Patrick Saunier, on a little white piece of paper. I wish I had kept that little white piece of paper because it was going to become like a passport into this whole other world. And I wrote the man a letter. The man whose name was on the paper, I wrote him a letter. And you know how the whole problem started was he wrote back. And the gospel always happens where there's real encounter between real people. Not just looking at the DVDs or reading the books, but meeting people. And here we got the letters. I'm telling him about working at Opal's. He's telling me about life in a 6.5 by 8.5 foot cell. He never asked me really for anything. He didn't ask me for money for cigarettes, or he didn't even ask me to come and visit him. But from the letters, I could see he didn't have anybody to come visit him. Nobody. His mama couldn't come, nobody. And he was alone. So I write him one day. I just said, hey, you know, I'll go come visit you sometime. I was going to do my little in run, you know, little in run. I'm not going to change my ministry, what I'm doing at the Adult Learning Center and anything. I'm just going to do a little in run, go see the little prison every now and then. And so I do. And boy, he's so excited to return mail, a visit. When you wake up on death row, you get 1,000 signals a day that you are nothing more than disposable human waste. And most people on death row are guilty. They've done it. So they have that inside them, that they've killed a fellow human being for whatever reason, the guilt or the remorse or whatever. And then somebody says, I'll come visit you. And here it is, and you had all the little papers to fill out, and he's, you know, you have categories of visitors. I'm finding out all this. You don't go to the front of the prison like the bakery, ring the bell, take a number, go see your man. And on the visitor form, the categories were relative, girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, ex-wife, important to know that. And then you had, and then he just simply put, look, I'm a Catholic and you're a nun, would you be my spiritual advisor? And I fill it all in. I have no felonies, check me out. And I sent in the form, and then I go to visit him. And I had no way. Nor would I have had the grace to say yes if I had known that going on that path meant that when they're going to kill him at midnight, everybody's going to have to leave the death house except the spiritual advisor who can be with him to the end, who will wait out the last hours of his life and walk with him. And when I do have that chance, when I'm talking to Pope John Paul about Catholic teaching on the death penalty and firming it up so that we had a stronger stance, that was the heart of what I said to him. I said, Your Holiness, does the Catholic Church only uphold the dignity of innocent life? And I'm all for that. And that's the beauty of being a Catholic. We stand for life across the board. Unborn, born, people who are the weakest and most vulnerable, old people with Alzheimer's don't even know their name, so that they're not taken by euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide, standing for life. And I said, but I see in the catechism it says dignity of innocent life. When I'm walking with a man to execution, to his death, and he's shackled hand and foot, he's completely defenseless, and he says to me, Sister, please pray God holds up my legs. There is no dignity in this death. A conscious, imaginative human being not only dies the moment he goes to his death, but he anticipates dying and dies inside his mind 1,000 times. Can we uphold the dignity of life, even of the guilty? All of it's going to be learning. First time I visit him, learning, scared to death in the prison, never been in a prison, scary place, gates clanging behind me, harsh voices, sounds, bouncing off of cement, metal, no little carpets or music like elevator music, nothing, just people screaming, woman on a tear, everybody dropping away. Then they locked me in a room. We're going to go get your man for you. And then I'm waiting for them to bring the man who was writing the letters, and that's when I started getting nervous, about him, because I just thought, well, and I'm holding on to my cross. I'm locked in this room. They're going to put him into a booth with a heavy mesh screen to protect me, and I'm glad. I'm glad he's going to be over there. I'm going to be over here. Because I'm just thinking, well, anybody can write nice letters. I mean, but I'm going to be talking to a murderer. The guy murdered somebody. I don't know what he did yet, even. Are we going to be able to have like a normal conversation? Is his face going to look normal? Doesn't your face look different if you murdered somebody? These are the worst of the worst. That's who the Supreme Court said we're supposed to give the death penalty to, only to the worst of the worst. Not your ordinary garden variety murderers. Well, does anybody know what that means? Because if anybody we love is killed, that's the worst of the worst. A universe is lost that can never be replaced. Any killing of any human being is always the worst of the worst, because we're unique and irreplaceable. Well, here they go and get my man, and I'm praying. And then the guards brought him in, locked him in this booth, seeing a heavy mesh black screen, and I had to kind of strain like this. I saw his face, and I was shocked. His face didn't look any different from yours or mine. I couldn't believe how human he looked. And I was given a grace. Contemplation, doesn't just happen when you're on retreat, when you're praying, when you go to Mass, praying the rosary, meditating or keeping vigil before the Blessed Sacrament in the Adoration Chapel. Contemplation happens where God breaks through. And when I saw that man's face for the first time, I remember thinking, whatever he has done, he is worth more than the worst thing he's ever done in his life. We are all worth more than the worst thing we've ever done in our life. When you are in a court, you can never call an evil person acts of evil. People do amazing and stunningly evil things. But I got it. I got it about him. And that truly, he had this dignity as the Son of God. Now, boy, I'm going to be going on a journey, and you're going to be going on it too, because the crime is I'm going to find out about it. Several months after I began visiting, I found out he had a brother, Eddie. This was my first legal question. This book, The Death of Innocence, I know a lot about the legal system and how it works and what happens to poor people when you're brought into trial without a lawyer to be able to access and make the law and constitutional protections work for you. I know a lot. Then I knew nothing. But I did have this question. There'd been a murder, whatever it was. I'll wait till he trusts me enough to tell me. But how did one brother get death and one brother get life? And later I'm going to find out, and the Saunier case is more complex than this. But did you know if you got two defendants, there's a murder, there are no other eyewitnesses? If one of them's willing to come up, take the stand, point to the other and say, yeah, he did it, they get a reduced sentence for saying that. And how do we know from square one we got the truth? How do we know? And because don't you think if we're going to take on ourselves as a society that we're going to decide and make ourselves the arbiters of life and death, and when we're going to send somebody into eternity, that we daggone better well and have a way of getting to the truth? It's going to be very complex, this journey into the law. And always growing up as a good citizen, growing up as a good Catholic, great respect for the law. If something's a law, it must be holy. If something's a law in the United States of America, it must be holy. And I'm going to learn. So I began to visit both the brothers. A couple of months went by, and I didn't want to be naive. I'm going to wait till they reveal when they trust me enough. Because I asked myself coming home, and I said, well, he didn't talk about what he did. And I thought to myself, well, the first time I'm going to meet somebody, I'm going to trust him enough, tell him the worst thing I ever did in my life, that I would wait, that it would take trust. But I didn't want to be naive, and I go in the Prison Coalition office, and I said, could I see some background information on the Saunier case? And they say, yeah, sure. And they pull out these innocent-looking, bland-looking manila folders, all of them in a stack, and I opened up the one on the top of the heap and looked squarely into the faces of two beautiful young teenage kids. Their parents had sent their prom picture into the newspaper. In this little town in Acadiana where Cajun people live, David LeBlanc, 17 years old, Loretta Bourque, 18, and the terrible headline, teenagers found murdered. And I'm looking into their faces. Two young people have been ripped out of life. And then I read the unspeakably terrible details of what happened on a November night when Patrick Saunier and his brother Eddie are rabbit hunting out in a sugarcane field. Young kids would go there. It was a local lover's lane. It was out of the way. There was nothing around. They'd go there to park, and these two kids go there. The brothers come up to the car. And we know this because 5 other teenage couples came forward when David and Loretta were found murdered, shot in the back of the head near that sugarcane field. These 2 innocent kids ripped out of life, and Loretta had been raped at least once. And these other kids who had been quiet, who hadn't said anything, they said, that's what happened to us. Nobody was killed, but they'd come up to the car, and they said they were the security guards, that we were on private property, and they were they was to watch out for trespassers, and we were trespassing, and that they were going to have to bring us to the owner. And then that led to, well, look, tell you what, if the girl has sex with us, we won't bring you to the owners, which is rape. Aggravated rape, because they have guns. That's bad enough. That's terrible. But this night, whatever happened, these two kids are shot in the back of the head. And I'm reading the story, and it's the two people I'm visiting now as their spiritual advisor. And this is what they did. And immediately I think of the parents, because it's every parent's worst nightmare, because that's why you tell your kids, call us if you're going to be late. When I'm talking to young people, university students and people, that's why your parents say, call us if you're going to be late, because they know that these kind of really bad things can happen to you. And I thought of the parents, and everybody was Catholic in this. The Soniers too. We were all Catholic. And it wasn't just because they were Catholic, but I just thought, oh, I ought to do something for the parents. What could I do? They must be in hell. And then I thought, they're not going to want to see me. I'm the spiritual advisor to the two people who kill their kids. And I stayed away. I didn't do anything. I didn't even write them a note to say I'm sorry about the loss of David, your son. I'm sorry about the loss of Loretta, your daughter. I said nothing to them. It was a terrible mistake. When you see the movie Dead Man Walking, it got it. And I had a good editor. I downplayed this thing of not reaching out to the victims' families in the first draft that I did of Dead Man Walking. And when we going over it, Jason Epstein, my good Jewish editor with Catholic nuns going through the draft, and he's saying, well, Helen, that was a bad mistake, not reaching out to those victims' families. He said, you kind of downplay it in your draft here. I said, yeah, I know. And he says, well, it was cowardice, wasn't it? You were scared, weren't you? I go, yeah. He said, look, when you write your book, don't just take people with you on the peaks of the waves when you do it right. Take them in the troughs when you do it wrong, and then they're going to trust you that you're going to speak truth, because it's a terrible mistake, and it was. And I met them at the worst possible time you could meet a victim's family, because the last act before Patrick was executed was a pardon board hearing, which was very public. The TV cameras were there. Everything was public. And that's when I met the victim's family. And why were they there? They were there because they were told this is the last legal hoop you got to jump through to get your justice. And they have been surrounded with and propped up with, we're going to get justice for your dead child, and the justice we're going to get is we're going to get at least one of them. We wish we could get both of them, and we're going to call you, and you're going to get to sit on the front row and watch as we kill the one who killed your loved one, and you're going to get to watch that, and that is going to heal you, and that's going to give you justice for your child. That's going to give you closure. And they're all there with all their friends and all their relatives. And what am I doing there? With one lawyer, one psychiatrist, the three of us. We're there to ask the clemency board not to kill Patrick Sonier, and that's when I met the victim's family. And how could they not see me as an enemy? I deserved to be thought of that way because I hadn't reached out to them at all. And we were walking outside the building while the pardon board was voting, and I rounded a corner, and there they were. And we bumped into each other. And the Bourques, who had lost their daughter, were first. They see me. They actually acted in a very dignified way. They averted their gaze from me and walked past me quickly. And right behind them are the other parents of the boys, the LeBlancs, who had lost David, their only son. And surprised by grace, they walked right up to me. And Lloyd LeBlanc, the father of David, said, Sister Helen, all this time you've been visiting those two brothers and you didn't want to come see us. Sister, we had nobody to talk to. Sister, you can't believe the pressure on us with this death penalty. Well, I didn't know victims' families under any pressure. I thought any victim's family given the chance for this is going to go for this, don't you? If you've had the ultimate loss, and you're offered the ultimate punishment, don't you go for it? He said, sister, I pray in this little chapel. Come pray with them. Come pray with me. I keep vigil before the Blessed Sacrament, 4 to 5, Friday mornings. Come pray with me. I said, Mr. LeBlanc, well, he was the gracious one, and he's the hero of this book because of his story. I'm the storyteller, and I made some mistakes, but this man, I go and I kneel alongside him in St. Martin of Tours Church in St. Martinville, Louisiana, and we're praying the rosary together. And I'm going to tell you, one of the beauties of being a Catholic is we have so many different ways of accessing God. We have the rosary. We have vigils before the Blessed Sacrament prayer. We have retreat. We have Eucharist. We have a lot of ways to get close to God. And I grew up on the rosary. We had a real Catholic family. Every day, every night before we went to sleep, we said the rosary together. On family trips, we'd be in a station wagon like a month at a time. And if you start getting rambunctious on the back seat, somebody's going to say, shut up, man, we're going to have to do another rosary. Too late. Here goes Mama. Name of the Father and of the Son. And I'm going to tell you what, 150 Hail Marys later, that's like Catholic Ritalin or Prozac or whatever. But it also taught you could be uproarious with your brother and sister 1 minute, and then you could be praying the next. That is as close as turning to God in your heart and to begin to pray. And I'm kneeling alongside this man, and it's Friday, so it's the sorrowful mysteries of Jesus' agony and his passion and his death. And I'm kneeling alongside a man who's praying through the passion and death of his own son. And it all started from there. The first glimpse of his soul happened in that prayer because he was praying for everybody in the prayer, see? Not just his family, safety of teenagers, the poor family, but he was praying for Pat and Eddie Saulnier's mama, Gladys Saulnier, that lived in the town. He prayed for her because he knew she couldn't even go in the grocery store because she'd overhear people saying, oh, there she is, that white trash woman. Her sons are the ones that killed the Bourke and the LeBlanc kids. And people are cutting up dead animals and throwing them on our front porch. And kids are driving around our house saying, mother of the murderers, mother of the murderers. How do you have a laser beam of hatred in a society that we're going to take you out, but now don't hate his mama? Be kind to his children. This is an act of legalized hatred because we are going to kill you. You cannot live among us. We cannot be safe unless you no longer live among us. How do you keep that from spreading to his mother, his father, his brothers, his sisters, his children? Lloyd LeBlanc was conscious of her suffering. And he was the first victim's family. And I've been graced in this journey over the last 20-something years to accompany victims' families who have taught me what it's like to be thrown in the fire and the power of the gospel of Jesus that can bring people through the fire whole again. And here's how Lloyd LeBlanc, this is the way as we got to know each other, he took me through it. He was the first to teach me that forgiveness is not first and foremost what you do for somebody else to lift their burden of guilt. And this was how he put it. He said, sister, everybody was saying to me, Lloyd, you got to be for the death penalty. That's what I meant by pressure. When I talked to you that day, pressure, here's pressure. Everybody's saying to me, Lloyd, if you're not for the death penalty, it's going to look like you didn't love your boy. You got to be for the death penalty. Look how Eula, your wife's suffering. Look how Vicky, your daughter's suffering. You got to be for the death penalty because they knew I didn't want to be for the death penalty. But everybody's saying it to me. So I bought into it. Boy, I went there. I said, they're right. I wish I could pull the switch myself. I wish we could have gotten both of them with the death penalty. We only got one. I don't care about his mother. I don't care about anybody. I just want to see justice done. He killed. He deserves to die. I want to be there. I want to do it. And then he said, I didn't like the way it made me feel inside because I've always been a kind person. I love to help people. I'm good with my hands. I can fix anything. Sister, you come to my house, you're going to see lawnmowers on the driveway. Just people saying, hey, Lord, can you fix this? And I will, because that's who I am. And then I had all this hatred and this bitterness getting inside of me. And then I said to myself, they killed our son, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And I'm going to do what Jesus said. And after I really got to know him, he confided and shared with me this when the sheriff's deputy did come the next day and said, Lord, think you better come with us to the morgue. We think we have your boy to identify the body. And there they pulled David's body out, this beautiful kid that everybody loved. And his first thought, he said, was, I can't fix this. And he prayed the prayer he had learned as a child, and that he said every Sunday at Mass, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, over the body of his son. And when he came to the words in the Our Father, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. He said, I said the words. I didn't feel the words, but the words were path. And he set his face to go on the path of forgiveness. And God's grace met him on that path. He always described it as a way of saving his own life. That the love and integrity in him was not overcome by the hatred. And maybe that's what Jesus meant when he said, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. That maybe somebody starts out as our enemy, but we don't let them stay our enemy, lest we be overcome and become the hatred ourselves. Because it's the most human thing in the world when someone has hurt us or hurt somebody we love to want to get even and to cause them pain and to see them suffer for what they did to us. How human can you get? It's in all of us. But with the gospel of Jesus and with grace, we don't have to stay there. And our luminous witnesses are victims' families around this country who are standing up more and more, and they are the ones helping to deliver us out of this thing of the death penalty. When New Jersey did away with the death penalty 4 years ago, 62 murder victims' families testified before the legislature, do not kill for us, not in our names. And some of them were just really being brutally honest with him, just saying, is what you're promising us is that you're going to get the death penalty? My daughter's dead forever, and you're going to offer us the death penalty? We're going to wait, what, 10 years, 15 years, and then you're going to summon us? We're going to sit in the front row and watch as you kill the one who killed our daughter and that's supposed to heal us? One father whose precious little girl was abducted by a crazy, vicious person and killed. He couldn't do it without tears. But he said, Susie, our daughter was such a loving child. When I would walk with her, one day on the sidewalk, we were walking along, and she said, Daddy, don't step on that bug, because that bug has a right to life too, Daddy. We don't want to step on the bug. That precious child who's so loved, even bugs. And I'm going to ask for the life, and I'm going to watch as you kill a sick person who killed our daughter, and that's going to honor her? Everybody has these incredible stories. They are our witnesses, like it says in the letter to the Hebrew, a cloud of witnesses. And we have them among us. And it's Lloyd of Law who first teaches me. And then when I went to the murder victims group meetings, then I got my second big shock. If it was a shock to see that the face of the man who had committed the murder was a human being, when I get to the murder victim support group meetings, person after person after person around the circle said, everybody stays away from us, because nobody knows what to say to us, even the people in our church. And they need arms of community around them. As they lose their focus and lose their jobs or marriages break apart. People who lose a child, 70% of the people get divorces. Whatever fault lines were in the marriage, it can break apart under the stress. Siblings who lose a brother or sister, they lose their parents too. They drop through the cracks. They're lost. They need us. The archbishop that was in the Lafayette Diocese after the murders had happened, Lloyd LeBlanc is the one who wrote him a letter and said, does the Catholic Church ever do anything for victims' families? And that year, the archbishop began to have a mass for victims of violence. Bishop said the mass, gathered people in the arms of the community. Then support groups were formed out of that. And I picture the gospel of Jesus. There are two arms on the cross. And this issue stretches. Sounds simple. You kill, you die, right? And if you're not for the execution, then you're against the victim's family. The gospel of Jesus is much deeper than that. The gospel of reconciliation, of things that seem to be polar opposites, that you don't have to be, and we don't have to be enemy to anyone, and to love. Yeah, we got to make ourselves safe. Yes, we have to protect ourselves against violent people. That's the first order of business of what prisons are about. The SAFE campaign that's going on now in California to end state killing is about, yes, of course we can be safe. And then when you look at the money you poured into this machinery of death, keeping it going, and they're not really using it, 720 people on death row, executions every 20 years, to the tune of $300 million in execution. Think of what we could do with the resources of our society for those who need it. Affordable housing, health care, at-risk kids, Head Start. Money's not a neutral thing. Martin Luther King used to say the most moral document you ever look at is a budget. Budgets are moral documents because it's what we use in our resources. Are they going to be for life or are we going to do for death? And even prosecutors will acknowledge that a capital case is the Cadillac of the criminal justice system. Everything about it's more expensive. That may sound counterintuitive at first, but just read the facts, and it's all out there now, especially with the SAFE campaign. Yes, we need to be safe. Pope John Paul, in his encyclical, The Gospel of Life, boy, he took that death penalty, pushed it to the edge of the table. Because he said, when Thomas Aquinas called, said yes, the state could execute, it was always for the defense of society, because they didn't have prisons, they didn't have ways to protect themselves from violent people. But he said, we have prisons now. We have a way to keep ourselves safe. We don't have to imitate the violence by killing the people who've killed other people. In the end, I'm on both arms of the cross. Because I'm with the victims' families, start a group in your arms. I didn't change the whole blooming world. I did one act. We started a support group for murder victims' families. If everybody in here tonight would do one concrete act. St. Basil in the 4th century said, annunciations of frequent incarnations are rare. If we each did a little incarnation of making the Word of God come alive in flesh and blood, in an act, in a deed, to help bring love and reconciliation and peace closer in this world. Violence stops with us. No violence. No violence. That's Jesus. Jesus. Where's Jesus? Where's Jesus in our culture? Who said to Pilate, my kingdom's not of this world. I always picture this floaty thing. My kingdom's not of this world. Oh, yeah. And I was in my phase where I just thought, well, everybody just goes to heaven, you know. And I didn't know about resisting injustice on earth for help for us to make. The kingdom of God is within us, and we make it come now. And Jesus says to Paul, if my kingdom were of this world, I would summon an army of my followers who would come and defend me and rescue me. Where's the army? And the reason I'm on the other end is because here this man, Patrick, was the first. I have accompanied 6 human beings to execution and been with them. I'm always asked, are they sorry? Are they remorseful? What's it like? It's not unlike being with people in hospice or people who, the difference is, though, I've been with people who have died in hospitals or died in hospice where they're made comfortable and then give their souls over to God in death. But I had never been with anybody who's fully alive and drinking cups of coffee and talking to me as he always had. And the only way we know he's going to die is with my mind and my watch, and we're counting down the hours. When Susan, when we were doing the film of Dead Man Walking, and by the way, you couldn't ask for closer collaboration with Tim Robbins, who wrote the screenplay, Susan, who was me in the film, and Sean, who was Matthew Poncelet, to get this film right. Because we had formula movies before then about death penalty. The whole movie was about, did he do it or not? Yeah, he's guilty. End with execution, justice done, end of reflection. Dead Man Walking takes the audience, takes you into this journey on both arms of the cross. Here's the perpetrator who did it. Here's the crime. Here's the victim's family suffering. Here's a nun caught in the middle who doesn't know what she's doing half the time. And it just takes you there. And Tim explained to me, if you want to do propaganda, then I would make a film, shingle in with 144 arguments against the death penalty, and I'm going to manipulate the audience until we can do the crime way early in the film. That's going to fade, and then all the sympathy is going to be with the person being executed. He keeps taking us back and forth, and even when Matthew Poncelet stretched out on a gurney, and you see him being killed, then the camera aerial view of the victims in the woods spread out in the woods, they're dead, and now at the end of the film we got 3 people dead. And the theater managers told Tim they had never had a film where film ended, people stayed in their seats till the screen went blank and then filed out silently because they were thinking. And the movie Dead Man Walking changed the way films were done. And you got to know this, that every Hollywood studio turned down that screenplay because they never dreamed it could be a box office success. Take people that deeply into a journey on both sides of it and then leave it up to them to decide. Their thing was, hey, and Tim, it's got like no romantic element because you got a nun in it. Their solution was, well, now if you let us, like, spice it up between the nun and the death row inmate, maybe we're going to have something there. And Tim Robbins is saying to them, it's a journey of redemption for everybody. We're not spicing it up between the nun and the death row inmate. And when Susan, on the Feast of the Annunciation, the Academy Awards, Feast of the Annunciation, 1.3 billion people are watching the Academy Awards, and she stepped up to receive the Best Actress. Do you see God in this? I mean, what an annunciation. The whole world, it gave it over to the world. I was in Japan 6 weeks later, and the taxi cab driver was going, Dead Man Walking. And what is it? It's just us. That's the best definition of justice, by the way. It's just us. Small group, people of faith working to end the death penalty, a little clutch of people, steadfastly. We got to wake up on this. We got to change this in California. And they're the ones who made this happen tonight. They didn't know if 10 people were going to come. And here we are together. And the Spirit of God is here with us, Jesus. And we're all growing in it. And we're all called to act. We're all called to wake up. Each in our own way, in our own time, and it took me a long time to wake up. So I got a lot of patience in terms of understanding that we come to wake up on something when somehow we encounter another way of seeing it, and we do that. And that's why it's always going to be important to belong to community of faith. Because if we go off by ourselves, we lose our way. We need each other. Do we not? The second book, The Death of Innocence, is going to take you through the execution of 2 people. It's going to break your heart, especially Dobie, an African-American man in Louisiana. He had an IQ of 65. If the Atkins decision of the Supreme Court, how many years did it take the Supreme Court to finally acknowledge that maybe we shouldn't kill mentally challenged people? It took them a long, long time, one of the last in the world to do it. If Atkins had happened 2 years earlier, Dobie would never have been killed in Louisiana. And it's going to break your heart to see what happened to this black man, railroaded in this all-white jury, and Supreme Court upholding that that was a jury of his peers. How can you have a Supreme Court of the United States, and here's a black man on trial for his life for killing a white woman, and they look at it and they review it and they said, well, yeah, his constitutional protections were there because, look, the lawyer didn't raise a formal objection. Who was his lawyer? You want to know why it's only poor people who get sent to death row? Because they don't have the resources to be able to use the law, every inch of the law, to access their constitutional protections. It is so sad what happens, especially in the Deep South states. Now, you put the money into it. Y'all will really put the money into it. Both sides, defense. They do get defense here. It is so pitiful and so sad and so wrong. And I have been I didn't know any of this. And I take you through these two cases. The second one is a man in Virginia, Joseph Odell. From the time they arrested that man, he said, I didn't do it. His whole thing was just asking if he could have one full evidentiary hearing and he could have the DNA tested to show he did not rape and kill Helen Shartner. No court ever gave him that. No court ever gave him the full hearing for the evidence to come out. And then when Virginia did kill him, they destroyed the DNA evidence so it couldn't be tested. But enter into this story the Italian people. Somebody in the Italian parliament hears about Joseph Odell. He sees a little bitty article. It's on the Human Rights Commission of the Italian parliament. He sends a letter to Laurie Ers, a young woman in an innocence project who was working to free Joseph Odell and show his innocence. Next thing you know, we got members, delegations of the Italian parliament coming. They passed a resolution for Joseph Odell. We have Leo Lucas Orlando, the mayor of Palermo, coming over, making Joseph an honorary citizen, telling him, Joseph, if Virginia kills you, we're not going to let you be buried on Virginia soil. We're going to ship your body over, and he describes this great cemetery where you're going to have a burial. I kept thinking of Joseph of Arimathea, and it's the first time a body was shipped for an executed criminal, and it was buried in Palermo, and Pope John Paul heard about Joseph Odell. Everybody, you go there today, there are going to be people who are Joseph Odell. The night Virginia killed him, over 3 million people were listening to their radios at 2 in the morning to hear what happened to Joseph Odell. In Virginia, they killed him without blinking an eye, one more criminal executed. And that's how I got in through that little window to be able to have the conversation with the Pope about the death penalty. And what I was able to give was pastoral experience to put it right in the lap of the Pope. Because the teachings were kind of here and there, and people could quote them. There was this little loophole, and that little loophole, I said, please, we need you to strengthen Catholic teaching. And then we have Pope John Paul. He changed the catechism. And when he came to St. Louis in '99, for the first time, he held out to us, no to abortion, no to euthanasia, no to physician-assisted suicide, and no to the death penalty, which is cruel. Our Supreme Court won't acknowledge that it's cruelty or torture. It's cruel and it's unnecessary, and even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them. No exceptions. Because the minute we make an exception, we are making ourselves the arbiter of, well, this one deserves it, or that one deserves it. And we cannot entrust governments with that kind of power to decide who lives and who dies. We don't need to. We have a way to keep ourselves safe. All of this stuff, the books, the movie, the opera, Dead Man Walking, and it's all to educate the people. Because that's what our role is as sisters. It's to live the gospel and to be with the people and to help the gospel to live.